Bienvenidas amigas, bienvenidos amigos a un programa más de Conversando con Correa. Cito, la lucha por el derecho a la intimidad es la nueva lucha por nuestra libertad. Hay gente que ha arriesgado la vida por defender esa libertad. Y hoy nos honra con su presencia en nuestro programa una de aquellas personas. Me refiero a Edward Snowden. Edward, bienvenido y muchas gracias por aceptar nuestra invitación.
Buenos días.
Unos te acusan, otros te galardonan, por ejemplo, con el premio Sam Adams, reconociendo a la gente que ha tratado de elevar la ética, guardar los principios, incluso en actividad de inteligencia. Para ti, ¿cuál debe ser ese balance tan difícil de establecer entre seguridad y privacidad?
I think this is a common mistake that a lot of people who are discussing these issues make. They see on one side we have security, and on one side we have privacy, or liberty, as it's more commonly known. And I think the reality here is it's a false choice, because if you see security as something that you buy at the cost of liberty, in reality, you're losing both. Because if you have no liberty, you're perfectly vulnerable. You're not safe. You're not secure. Like if you're in a prison, do you feel safe? Yes, there's walls around you. Yes, there's bars around you, but you're not free. And without freedom, security has no meaning. So I think when we look at this, now what we really need to understand is security programs, policies, efforts, machines that are purchased at the expense of liberty are not serving their purpose. They are intended to make us more free, more successful, more safe. Safe is free. Without freedom, there is no safety.
Sí, pero también es cierto que después de los ataques terroristas del 11 de septiembre de 2001, eso fue un golpe extremadamente duro para la sociedad norteamericana, han quedado traumados con justa razón. Tal vez hubo una sobrereacción, pero ¿cómo protegerse para no sufrir de nuevo esta clase de ataques?
I think it's natural in the understanding that there are criminals, there are dangerous people, there's wars and violence in the world, that we should protect ourselves. The question is, how do we best protect ourselves in the way that preserves the things that we're trying to protect? It's sort of this idea of we have to burn down the village to save it. If you are destroying the thing that the terrorists are trying to destroy, you're doing their work for them. I was in the United States on the base where the headquarters of the National Security Agency was located on September 11th. And I tell this story in my book, Permanent Record. And the funny thing about it was, when these planes were up in the air, when these terrorists were actually operating, the moment that our country needed them the most, the NSA headquarters was being evacuated. The very top chief of the U.S. National Security Agency ordered an evacuation of all but a tiny fraction of the personnel there. The director of the CIA, I wasn't there, it's in a different state, did the same thing. And this happened before the public even knew what was happening, before we even realized this was a terrorist event. These people were leaving the building. And this is what we have to understand is the reason that we have security services, the reason that we have police officers is to hire brave people who take risks. Now, of course, we don't want people to take needless risks. But I think it's proper and appropriate to realize this was a moment when everyone in the country and everyone in the world needed these people behind their desks. And yet that's the moment that they left. Because they recognized correctly there was some danger. There was some plane up there where they didn't know where it was headed. But I ask you this. You're the director. Difficult for you to imagine. You're the director of the U.S. National Security Agency. And you realize, you've just had people come in and say, we're facing a terrorist attack. There's another plane up there. We don't know where it's headed. It's hit the World Trade Center. It's hit the Pentagon. And there's one left. Now you understand everything about the United States culture, about the political structures, about the kind of thing the terrorists go after. Now, they have one bullet left. There's the Capitol building, there's the Supreme Court, there's all of these different important structures in the United States. And then there's the CIA, and then there's the NSA. Do you really think terrorists are more likely to attack some intelligence workers or some military base, or are they going to attack the actual structures of power?
Pero de verdad es un poco comprensible. Cuando hay un peligro de esa magnitud, las cabezas, los que tienen que tomar las grandes decisiones, muchas veces, contrariamente a su voluntad, te hablo porque yo he sido presidente de la República, tienen que buscar un refugio seguro para poder seguir dirigiendo, bueno, en mi caso el país y en el caso del director de la Agencia de Seguridad o el director de la CIA, todas las operaciones. ¿No es aquello lógico?
So this is one of those things where you ask, is it logical? It is correct, as you say. It is, shall we say, pragmatic. It's practical to recognize there is some threat. And so if we can do anything to mitigate the threat, we should do that, right? But then you begin going, well, what are the greatest threats, right? What is the hierarchy of threat? There's the threat to the NSA today. There's the threat to the CIA right now in this moment. But if the NSA leaves, if the CIA leaves for the day, what happens to the threat for the country? That begins to inflate. And then when we go blind, when we have nothing that we can see, when we're panicking because the people that are supposed to protect us have left the building, what example does that set for the rest of the country? Right? And again, as you say, I think it's natural. It's understandable. I'm not criticizing these people. I'm not saying that they're the worst people in history. I'm saying what happened is they allowed terrorism to succeed, not in the criminal act of violence, but they allowed themselves to be controlled. They allowed their decisions to be controlled by fear. And this fear has not left the United States even today. This became a global pandemic that affected governments in France, it affected them in Germany, it affected them in Latin America. Everywhere in the world we face this new kind of securitization, where because they realized that there are small and isolated criminal groups out there that are willing to kill themselves in order to do violence to other people, they went, we will stop at nothing to make sure this can never happen again. But you can't actually do this, and you know better than anyone else, as someone who's been a president, there are limits to what the law can achieve. There are limits to what the military can achieve, to what police can achieve, to any kind of intelligence can achieve. Because no matter what you outlaw, let's say you outlaw guns, someone can pick up a hammer, they can pick up a kitchen knife, they can use a car to drive into a park, and we've seen it happen. This will constantly happen. The only way that you can protect society from terrorism is to teach the politics of resilience. You care for the victims. You care for the people who were harmed by this. And then you show them that we can together build a society that will survive these criminal attacks, just as we survive arson, just as we survive theft, every other crime. The central mistake of 9/11 was taking terrorists who are simply criminals. They're just murderers. And we've dealt with murderers before, and elevating them to the sort of status of a state peer, saying Al-Qaeda is the same as Afghanistan, is the same as Iraq, is the same as some country. And because of this, we're going to change all of our laws. We're going to change all of our policies. We're going to change the things that we believe in order to counter murderers. And the United States fundamentally changed, the government of the United States, I would say, fundamentally changed the world order in the wake of September 11th, the international order, in a way that we're still dealing with the consequences of that today. And I know I've been going on for a while here, but I'll just say one thing. The question that I ask you is this. The United States government had the sympathy of the world the day after, on September 12th. They could have done absolutely anything. They're the most powerful government in the history of the world, and now they have been made a victim. They could have changed laws, they could have changed Interpol, they could have created a multilateral, multinational policing organization that had universal jurisdiction. They could have investigated in Afghanistan regardless of what the Afghanistan government had wanted. Instead, they said, we don't want to work with anybody else. They said, instead, we're going to go to war. Instead, we are going to invade Afghanistan. Instead, we are going to invade Iraq, because they wanted to work in this old model. And what happened was this old model was the model that they had created. And now this old model became the model that they destroyed. And now we're in a world without a functioning system, without a functioning model. And that's 20 years later, what we're seeing today, what we're dealing with today. The question is, what do we want 2020, 2021 to look like?
Sí, lo que pasa es que es una guerra muy difícil de pelear, Edward. Siempre va a haber diferentes opiniones, pero por ejemplo aquí en Europa, la guerra contra el fundamentalismo terrorista son muchas veces nacidos en la propia Europa, en Francia, en Bélgica, gente que no solo no teme morir, busca morir. ¿Cómo defender una sociedad de esa clase de enemigos? Siempre habrá la discusión hasta dónde se tiene que ir, siempre habrá acuerdos, desacuerdos. Yo coincido contigo, creo que la estrategia debe ser otra, pero también reconozco lo difícil que es tomar decisiones en esta clase de situaciones. Lo que sí molesta, lo que sí es un parámetro recurrente es la doble moral. Porque, pongamos el caso de Julian Assange, Wikileaks. Si esa información, Julian Assange, Wikileaks, lo hubieran filtrado de China o de Rusia, tendrían un monumento en el Zócalo en Washington, ¿no? Si lo que tú hiciste, respondiendo a tu conciencia, ¿no? Pese a que era legal, entre comillas, lo que estaban haciendo con leyes muy cuestionables que pueden romper la propia constitución de Estados Unidos, pero lo hubieras hecho revelando esta clase de espionaje de otros países, adversarios tradicionales de Estados Unidos, serías un héroe en tu país. Pero como revelaste esta información de tu propio país, muchos te persiguen. Entonces lo que sí molesta es la doble moral.
Yeah, I think you touched on a number of things I want to respond to. One was, as you said, there are serious problems, and there is a need for some level of surveillance. We have always had governments that have retained investigative capabilities, right? And even when you think just local law enforcement, the question is, and this is really the question of our generation, how should we apply them in a time when technology is changing? What I saw and what brought me forward was the beginning of what we call mass surveillance. Governments in the United States and Europe, they deny, the ones who are involved in this program, they deny the existence of mass surveillance. They use another term, bulk collection. But bulk collection and mass surveillance, of course, are the same thing. It's a euphemism, just like instead of torture, we say enhanced interrogation. Just like instead of kidnapping, we say extraordinary rendition. But surveillance, when we have real dangers, when we have threats to society, when we have criminals, these things can be responded to. I worked at the CIA, and I volunteered to do that. I worked at the NSA, and I volunteered to do that. I understand that there are legitimate aims for intelligence collection, for investigative means. The distinction, I believe, and that I came to feel very strongly during my time in the intelligence community, is the difference between targeted surveillance and indiscriminate, or as I call it, mass surveillance. What the internet and the global telecommunications system has developed to provide, both to governments, which some people may trust and say it's okay for them to have, and also to companies, private corporations that owe the public nothing, and you see now they feel no loyalty to them at all, is the ability to monitor everyone, everywhere, because it's cheap, because it's easy. And then governments go, well, if these companies have all of these records, why don't we look through them? We can see what everyone's doing everywhere in an attempt to identify those kind of terrorists that you mentioned. But the thing is, the United States operated a system of mass surveillance that was completely secret. No one in the United States knew about it. for at least 6 years, I believe, or at least 5 years, before the very first leak in the newspaper. No one knew about it. How many terrorists do you think it caught? 0.
Con todo este aparataje.
Yeah, this is domestic surveillance we're talking about in the United States, because in the wake of September 11th, they said, we're going to start monitoring all the internet communications in the United States, all the telephone communications in the United States, all the email communications in the United States. Not to spy on our citizens. No, we would never do that. Although that's how they achieved this. They would collect all the communications for everyone and then look for links to terrorists' phone numbers and everything like that. And the idea was they would find these sleeper agents, these secret terrorists who are, embedded in the United States and are just waiting for some activation signal to wake up. And they never found any because they never existed. And the thing about terrorists is this. By the time your intelligence services or any intelligence services have enough information to look them up in a system of mass surveillance, they have enough information to go to a judge and say, we think this person is a terrorist. Here's their phone number. We want to monitor that phone number. Any judge in the world, in any language, in any culture, is going to look at that, look at the police, and say, okay, here's 30 days. Here's 90 days. Do whatever you want. Find out, is this person a terrorist? That's the way these investigations always traditionally worked when there was no alternative. This was how the FBI would do it. This was how the local police would do it. It happened the same in any country now. The thing is, once that initial leak happened, there's a very long story I could tell you behind this, but the initial leak happened, and this is the Bush era warrantless wiretapping scandals, very famous. The New York Times, the biggest newspaper in the country, had this story in October of 2004, an election year that George Bush won re-election by a very small margin. They didn't publish this story at the request of the White House, at the request of George Bush to their executive editor and the publisher of the New York Times. And they said, if you publish this story, this program is very effective, it's stopping terrorist attacks. Terrorist attacks will get through, and it'll be your fault. There will be blood on your hands. And so the newspapers didn't publish the story, they held it. And they didn't run that story for more than a year later when their own journalist was writing a book about it. And then the newspaper was forced to publish the story. Otherwise, they would be scooped by their own reporter. But here's the thing. In response to that, the government went, okay, this was a mistake, okay, this was unlawful, okay, we'll change the laws. But that's the wrong response. You go, wait. This program that they engaged in, this warrantless wiretapping, under the laws of the United States at the time, was totally unlawful. It was totally unconstitutional. They could not have done this. They did it anyway. Of course, it's a long history in the United States, going back to the Nixon administration, where they said, I think it was Kissinger who said, the illegal we do immediately. The unconstitutional takes a little bit longer. But the reality is this, they did it. And as much as we disagree with the decision, as much as we can understand it was unconstitutional, you can at least understand why they did it. They went, look, the greatest terrorist attack in the history of the United States just happened. We don't want the White House to be responsible. We don't want people to be attacked. We're going to find this out. They broke every law. They did everything they could to find out. But now, secretly, imagine you work in the Bush White House. No terrorists have been caught. They know the program's not effective, but they don't shut it down. They keep it in place. And the justification they give today is, well, they didn't know that it wouldn't be useful tomorrow, even though it had never stopped a terrorist attack. And it had clearly violated the rights of everyone in the United States. And of course, the 95% of the world population that lives outside the United States, subject to the same programs. They kept it in place. They made a public show in response to these newspaper stories, saying we're going to reform this, we're going to end this program. But the private reality was very different than the public claims of what was happening in this period. There was a secret report, and this is what actually brought me forward almost 10 years on from when these programs started in 2013, that said, rather than shutting down this unlawful program, they split it in half. The part that the newspapers had found out about, they shut that down. And they created a new law to provide a similar capability. But the other half of the program continued, and it expanded, and it grew. And under the new law that passed, that no one knew was actually empowering this program, it became more and more extreme. And this is what I think a lot of people miss in all of these things, is one of the core threats to the rule of law in a society, even a developed democracy, is not so much, and we'll get into this later, the whistleblower threat, as you say, someone publishing information that's secret, whether they're in China or whether they're in the United States, whether they're in Russia, whether they're in Ecuador. It is the government using secrecy as a shield against democratic accountability, using the secrecy of intelligence operations, using the secrecy of any kind of cover that they can find to excuse themselves from public awareness of what it is exactly that they have been doing this whole time that they've held power. And when this happens, not just in one instance, a small conspiracy or even a grand conspiracy, but about a specific thing, a specific topic, a specific person that's crystallized in one event, but it becomes a continuing pattern of behavior where executive branches in government begin to conceal their activities from the Congress. They begin to conceal their activities from the courts. It raises a question, well, what good does the law do the public if the people who are supposed to enforce the law, the executive branch of government, are not held to the account of the same law? And so basically they can exempt themselves from the judgment of the courts by, and we saw this in a famous case, it's called Amnesty versus Clapper in the United States, where just a few months before I came forward, in the very last months, as I said, there was this long history where bit by bit, thanks to journalists, we had found there were secret programs in the United States that very likely did constitute this idea of mass surveillance, this new kind of indiscriminate thing that sees everyone everywhere, regardless of how guilty or innocent you are, simply because it's easy, simply because it's close to free. And then, once they've compiled this permanent record of everything we've done for the last 5 years, the last 10 years, last 3 months, whatever, they can rewind that clock. They can look back at everything you did, as long as they have a phone number, as long as they have a name, as long as they have an email address, and see what it was you were doing on this day and that day, and investigate any life arbitrarily. Now, the thing is, there was this long history, again, where it climbed all the way through the courts in the United States, and it's been litigated for years and years, where we challenged in the courts, did these programs exist? And two, if they existed, were they legal? And of course, the presumption on civil society's side was that they were unlawful. The government counter-argued. One, we don't admit that these programs exist. Two, if they do exist, they are a state secret. They are classified. And if they're a state secret, if they're classified, the court can't review the legality of them because the court is not best placed to do this. It's the executive that makes decisions about national security. And so they derived this kind of national security exemption that covered the entirety of intelligence operations, of war-making operations, of law enforcement operations, in ways that had been based on court decisions from generations ago, but now in the modern day meant effectively the White House could do whatever they wanted as long as it was related to secret operations. And this was sadly the case both under Republicans in the Bush administration and then under Democrats in the Obama administration. And now in the Trump administration, the same thing continues. So we went from a program that had never existed in history.
Son políticas de Estado más que de gobierno, ¿no?
Precisely. It's about the infrastructure itself.
Pero tú eres una persona que trabaja en inteligencia, una persona madura. Debes reconocer que todo Estado necesita información reservada, información confidencial. Tu punto son los excesos que se han cometido, que no se utilizan necesariamente para combatir el terrorismo o proteger la democracia, sino para otros fines, y que muchas veces estas actividades se hicieron al margen de la ley, pero corrigiendo todos estos problemas, sabiendo que hay que guardar cierta información confidencial por seguridad nacional, ampliando el marco legal. Ustedes ya tienen el Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, que es muy amplio, ese marco, ampliando eso para recoger prácticamente todas las decisiones de la Casa Blanca sobre inteligencia. En otras palabras, si lo que tú consideras ilegal ahora, o que es ilegal ahora, se vuelve legal por cambios en la legislación, pero la naturaleza mismo del acto sigue siendo cuestionada, entrar en la privacidad de las personas. Nuevamente, ¿hasta dónde ir? Es decir, si se corrigen esos problemas que has mencionado, no resolvemos el tema de fondo. ¿Hasta dónde ir en cuanto a intervenir en la privacidad de las personas para defender la seguridad de todos?
So I think this, again, gets to the heart of the controversy.
Mi punto es que no es una cuestión de legalidad o ilegalidad. Es algo muy subjetivo. O sea, suponte que todo lo volvamos legal por reformas en la legislación, que los jueces se pueda establecer un método para que mucha facilidad los jueces den autorización para investigar a cualquier ciudadano. Pero ese es el punto. ¿Hasta dónde ir? Es un problema que va más allá de lo ilegal o legal. Es subjetivo y no tengo respuestas claras al respecto.
Yeah, so if we take your hypothetical here, which unfortunately is very close to true, where all of this, the most intrusive surveillance, has become legal. We just set aside the question of lawful or unlawful.
Pero aquí déjame remarcar otro punto, que como no estadounidense, el pueblo estadounidense lo admiro mucho, pero como no estadounidense sí molesta un poco. El doble estándar entre las leyes que protegen a los estadounidenses y las leyes que se aplican a los extranjeros, porque todas estas leyes son mucho más flexibles para espiar a los extranjeros. No se consideran con los mismos derechos que los estadounidenses.
So this is, yes, as you mentioned, people tend to, particularly when we're talking about international relations, they say the Americans, they say the Russians, they say the Chinese, they say the British. They don't make this distinction between the American people, the American government, between the Russian people, the Russian government. And this is a very important nuance because you have to understand that the American people are often against their own government. The Russian people are almost all the time against their own government, right? And it's the same in every country. We like to believe in the modern day that the government represents the people, but the answer of whether that's factually true is always kind of. They represent some people in some ways. But back to the heart of the issue that you described here. First, we have seen this hypothetical that you raised actually becoming a reality, where in the wake of a surveillance scandal, the wake of an intelligence scandal for governments, put yourself in the position of the United States president. You have just been briefed that you have an extraordinary power that no other country has, or no other country has yet, right? You've got it first because a lot of the internet servers are on your territory. You've got a huge budget. And so you can see more information about everything that everyone is doing everywhere. The problem is, it's not legal. You've been caught in a scandal. It's on the newspapers. You've been exposed. You go, okay, what do we do? Do we shut the program down? Well, we could. We could try to change the program. We could try to reform the program to make it more legal. But in many cases, what they've done, and not just in the United States, they've done it in Germany, they've done it in France, they've done it in China, they've done it in Russia, is they've gone, well, when our intelligence services are caught breaking the law, we have two choices. We can reform the activities of the agencies to comply with the law, or we can reform the law to comply with the activities of the agencies. And that's what has actually happened in the last 20 years. They've changed the laws to make what they were doing that was illegal now legal. So this brings us to what you have today. Let's presume it's all legal. Let's presume, even if it's immoral, it is not illegal. In this context, I say, my belief, and I think the belief of most everyone who studies privacy, is we have to make a distinction between targeted surveillance, targeted collection, and bulk collection or mass surveillance, right? We have to recognize there's not really a justification for collecting the phone calls, the emails, the purchase records of every grandmother out in the country just because you can. But today that's how it's done. And I mean, this gets into corporate things and profits and targeted advertising, the exploitation of the internet. That's a different conversation. But technology has changed in such a way that it gives institutions, centers of power, be they governmental or corporate now, extraordinary insight into so many lives in so many places. What we need, whether it's legal or illegal, is to recognize not just what's capable, but this lesson from the United States, which in many ways pioneered these programs. They constructed mass surveillance first, and they used it first. Even when these things got exposed in the press, they buried it again, they continued it again, it grew again, then it got exposed again, they burrow again, and it's a continuous process. But in every case that they did this, it led to one outcome, whether it was under the Bush administration, whether it was under the Obama administration. When I came forward in 2013 and I revealed for the first time proof of the government's own documents that there was a system of global mass surveillance. It affected everyone everywhere to the maximum extent that the government was capable. It involved the willful participation of companies far beyond what the law required. And despite this, in all of these things, because of course the US president, then Barack Obama, was facing criticism. This was a real scandal for him because they were going, you violated the Constitution, all these things. He made some of the arguments that you've raised. He said, look, first off, if you haven't done anything wrong, don't worry about this. No one is listening to your phone calls, he said. That was his first response, which was funny because no one had said that anyone was listening to your phone calls. The reality is, it's very difficult for a computer to capture a phone call and then break it down, all the words, all the different languages, into a transcript, and then to understand the transcript. That requires enormous amounts of storage, enormous amounts of processing. It's much easier and very simple for a computer to instead collect what they call metadata. Not the content of the communication, not the words you say, but the fact that you called this person, this phone number, contacted that phone number, at this time, for this long. The phone was located here, connected to this cellular tower, and the other phone number was connected to this cellular tower. That data is tiny. It's tiny. It's just a few sentences of information. And computers can instantly break this out into a global graph of every phone in the world and all the connections to every phone. So now they know who you care about. Now they know who you love. Now they know who you call in the middle of the night after you've gotten back from the doctor. They know the people that are closest to you. They know the people that you spend the most time on the phone with. And they never listen to a word you said, right? Now, despite this extraordinary capability, and this was, for the people who are lawyers who are interested in this, was derived from a power in the United States under what was called Section 215 of the Patriot Act that allowed them to collect all of these phone records. The courts later found that it was unlawful and they shouldn't have done that, but in your example, we're saying it was legal. Let's set it aside. As Obama was pressed harder and harder on, why did you do this? How could you justify this? What did this do? To his credit, he appointed 2 independent commissions, which had full access to classified information. One was the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board. One was the President's Review Group on Intelligence and Communications Technologies. And they went to the CIA. They went to the FBI. They went to the CIA, the NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, all of these groups in government. And they said, what did you do with these programs? How many attacks did they stop? And they found that now we're out of the Bush administration. We're now into the Obama administration. These things have been in operation for more than 10 years now. And he said, how many terrorist attacks did all this phone tracking stop? And they said, well, it didn't stop any terrorist attacks in the United States. And they said even, and this is a direct quote from the report, it never made a concrete difference in a single counterterrorism investigation. The best example they could find of its value was of a cab driver, a guy who drives a taxi in California, who sent $8,500 to his clan in Somalia, which was a part of al-Shabaab, which was related to terrorists. And they said because of this, there was a link to discovering terrorist finance. Now I ask you, if we put Lord knows how many billions of dollars into this program, we violate the law, we violate the rights of everyone in the United States and around the world for 10 years, and it gives us a cab driver who sent money to Africa. Is that worth it? And this is an important point because you asked before, how do we protect society? All right? We do have terrorists. We know they're out there. Should we spend billions of dollars and who knows how many man-hours on a program that in 10 years finds one cab driver? And the answer, of course, is no. But so then you ask, well, okay, if it didn't stop terrorist attacks, why do they do it? You know, these are sophisticated people and sophisticated agencies.
Y si lo hubieran logrado detectar, si esos programas hubieran detectado un grave intento de ataque, ¿estaríamos hablando como estamos conversando en este momento? ¿O sería otra la conclusión? O sea, tú estás cuestionando esos programas por los pobres resultados. Si hubiera dado resultado el programa o los programas, ¿tendríamos otras conclusiones? ¿Una opinión diferente?
Oh, right. Oh, it's a great question. There's two things. First, I'm criticizing these programs on their effectiveness because we know they're ineffective. But then there's the second question, the harder question you ask. If they were effective, does that justify them? I argue no, because it's a fundamental violation of rights. And again, to get back to the costs, when we talk about this case of the cab driver, it's very instructive because the reason they said in that quote, it didn't make a concrete difference in a counterterrorism investigation, even though it didn't find this one individual, is because the government said by the time they had developed enough information about this cab driver, enough suspicion regarding this cab driver to look them up in the database, they already had enough information to go to a traditional court, get a traditional warrant, and get the same information legally without this massive system, just by going to the phone company and going, hey, this person has this phone number, we think they're a terrorist, give us their phone records. And of course they would say yes. So there's this question of, again, at what cost? And when you ask what cost, there's this idea of diminishing returns, right? Where the more you do, the more you give up, the gains from your sacrifices become smaller and smaller. The level of security you gain becomes smaller and smaller. And what we know is effective, what we know is lawful, and what we know does work in identifying terrorists, in bringing them before courts, in thwarting their plots, and convicting them for their crimes, is doing targeted investigations of individuals and groups based on an individualized suspicion of wrongdoing, right? Think about it. You have police who are constantly looking for these people. They know when someone is out of place. They know when someone is up to no good. They know when someone is taking enormous shipments of things in a weird part of town that are explosive material. They know when someone comes from a church and says there's someone there who's troubled. I don't know if they have a mental illness. I don't know if they need help. They seem very angry. And they know to look in on these people. They know to check these people. Communities are constantly alert for the threat of terrorism because we are the ones who bear the consequences of attacks. Everyone wants to keep their children safe. Everyone wants to keep their community safe, and we all play a role in this. And the tips that are generated through this individualized investigation, where we go, look, this person appears to be a criminal. They appear to be associated with violence. They appear to be associated with a radical international group. We look at these people instead of looking at the whole world. And what we find is when you collect everything, you understand nothing. But when you narrow your focus just for the people who are probably up to no good, you have a much higher hit rate. You have a much higher success rate in your investigations because you're more discriminating.
Ok, entonces no se trata de que sea efectivo o no, de que sea legal o no. Atentar indiscriminadamente contra la privacidad de las personas obviamente es inmoral. ¿Tú crees que hay que limitar de mejor manera los objetivos? Porque obviamente se necesita seguridad nacional, Y hasta dónde ir en eso siempre es una discusión abierta. Lo entendemos perfectamente. Pero queda la otra parte de mi reflexión que te hice. Lo que molesta sí, es la doble moral, el doble estándar. Si lo que hizo Wikileaks, Julian Assange, lo hubiera hecho contra un gobierno no tan cercano a los Estados Unidos, más que no tan cercano, rival, chino, ruso, es decir, revelar crímenes de guerra con información que mantenían secreta, confidencial. Si tú hubieras revelado estos programas de espionaje, pero de otros países, seguramente del mismo gobierno te hubieran condecorado, te tuvieran como un héroe nacional por amplio consenso en tu país. Lo mismo para Julian Assange. Entonces, aquello molesta, ¿no? Si un gobierno como el mío, que lo toman como anti-americano, yo estudié en Estados Unidos, he vivido en Estados Unidos, admiro al pueblo americano, quiero mucho a Estados Unidos. Otra cosa no es coincidir con su política externa, sobre todo hacia América Latina, con casos de espionaje masivo, como el que tú revelaste. Pero si un gobierno como el mío hubiera tenido un espionaje así a sus ciudadanos y alguien como tú lo hubiera denunciado, o un ecuatoriano lo hubiera denunciado, ya le hubieran dado visa a Estados Unidos, estaría residiendo en Estados Unidos, sería un héroe nacional en Estados Unidos y yo sería un criminal. Entonces, eso es lo que molesta, la doble moral. ¿Tú qué piensas al respecto?
Well, I think this is something that we see in every country, and it's one of the fundamental threats, not just to whistleblowing, but to journalism. The primary criticism that the United States government, no less than the President of the United States, made against me personally was they went, look, we have proper channels, right? We have a way that you can go inside government and report any complaints, any concerns you have of wrongdoing, and that is the correct and only way of reporting some wrongdoing in government. But think about that for a minute. If what you are reporting is that the government is breaking the law, and you are relying on the government themselves to reform their activities, and you see the government's been doing this for years, and the government argues that they're not breaking the law, how do you do this? In general, the concept here is that you have to report wrongdoing to the ones who are responsible for that wrongdoing. And of course, this creates a necessary conflict. Now, it's the same in every country. I think it's the same in every company that does this. Whenever someone says the structure of power, the institution, has violated the processes, they're harming the rights of the public, the institution denies it, and they go, you know, this person shouldn't have done that. They should have come to us. They should have come to our lawyers. Let's have a conversation about this. And they always retaliate to the maximum extent they can. A company sues this person and says, this person revealed trade secrets, or they violated a non-disclosure agreement. In government, they say this person violated the confidentiality of their office, or they violated the secrecy of documents or government. And we can talk later about the legitimate and illegitimate secrets, because you're right, there actually should be some space for secrecy in government. It's a question of the abuse of secrecy. But then there's this other part. Well, okay, if it is natural for someone who has been exposed for engaging in some wrongdoing to take some retaliatory action toward the person who exposed them, how do we handle this? And I think nowhere more clear are the consequences for failing to handle this than in the case of, as you said, Julian Assange. What we see in the case of Julian Assange is many people are against Assange for his personality, for his prior politics, for his work. They accuse him of bias and all of these things. But think about what happens if you let this man go to prison for publishing what everyone, even the United States government, agrees was true information. And what every newspaper in the world,
illegal activities.
war crimes, serious abuses, because
War crimes.
That's something that people forget. The things that Julian Assange is being charged with today as a crime are not all of the controversial activities of the last years. They're things from 2009. They're the best work that WikiLeaks ever did. And so think about this for a moment. What you have is you have someone who's not an American. They're not an American citizen. They don't hold a green card. And they are clearly a publisher, right? People say, oh, he's a journalist, he's not a journalist. It doesn't matter. He published information that is in the judgment of newspapers in the public interest to know. And you can take this person and go, well, he violated the laws of the United States, even though he doesn't live in the United States, even though he doesn't have ties to the United States. And so we're going to deliver him to the United States, and he'll spend the rest of his life in prison for the crime of telling the truth. He's facing 17 counts of espionage for publishing true information. Now, you look, as you said, to the broader global context. What about China? What about Russia? What about Iran, right? In just the last few months, the New York Times, the biggest newspaper in the United States, has published secret classified material from the Chinese government about their human rights abuses in their northwestern region of Xinjiang and their abuses of the local people there. Under the laws of China, this is a crime. Is the United States going to send the New York Times reporters who revealed this information to China? And it's important to understand that Julian Assange didn't even get this information. He is not the source of this information. He's not a leaker or a whistleblower. He's only the person who published this information.
Pero perdóname, él no la publicó. La publicaron el New York Times, The Guardian. Eso es algo que no entiendo tampoco. Si tú me puedes explicar y le puedes explicar a nuestros televidentes, si el delito es difundir información confidencial, ¿por qué se persigue a la persona que obtuvo la información, Snowden, Assange, y no a los medios que publicaron esa información? ¿No hay una inconsistencia ahí?
And this is precisely correct. The reality is you cannot prosecute Assange under this sort of rubric without exposing every other journalist in the United States and around the world to the same kind of treatment. Now, I want to be clear here. Under the laws of the United Kingdom, under international law, under the United States law, Julian Assange does not qualify for extradition. The charges against him are clearly political. They're related to political activity. They're related to publication activity. And what are described as political crimes in the international law context do not qualify for extradition. So what we're waiting on now is to see if the British courts will exercise independence from the foreign policy part of the executive branch of their government and enforce the law fairly and say, look, while he may have violated the laws in the United States, as you argue, this doesn't qualify for extradition, even if it was a crime. Now, realistically, we think the chances of that are not great because it's difficult in the current environment to see the courts in the United Kingdom doing something that would frustrate the United States government on this level. But we need to think about those consequences if they do. If we stand aside and go, look, Assange for this reason or that reason or that reason, we won't support. He's a difficult guy, we don't like him, he's strange, he's unusual, whatever. He told us things that we not only deserved to know, but that we needed to know. And if that's a crime that can get you extradited in any country around the world, what is tomorrow going to look like? Look at the world today and look at the threats we see facing the press. It's happening in Russia. It's happening in the United States. It's happening everywhere. We have this new rise of authoritarianism where people in power realize today, right now, in this moment, there has never been a moment in history where they have had more power. And they're trying to cement that influence. They're trying to solidify the position that they hold. They're trying to spread their influence to the media, to the means of mass communication, to the internet. We see inconvenient stories being called things like fake news. And the true facts that we need to know in a democracy to cast our votes in a meaningful way are being described as crimes. What is tomorrow going to look like if we don't do something about this today?
Eso se llama muchas veces imperialismo, mi querido Ed. Pero en todo caso has hablado de medios de comunicación, lo que hizo el New York Times, contener esa información de espionaje masivo en época de Bush, ilegal, para no perjudicar la segunda elección de Bush. Al inicio, muchos medios apoyaron a Julian Assange, apoyaron a Edward Snowden y sobre todo contra Assange se han portado terriblemente mal, ¿no? Empezando por The Guardian. Grandes periodistas que arriesgaron mucho como Glenn Greenwald, Laura Poitras, te ayudaron, pero hoy podríamos decir que los medios hegemónicos critican o están abiertamente, por ejemplo, contra Julián y también muchas veces contra ti. ¿Qué es lo que ha pasado? Debería estar defendiendo la libertad de expresión, debería estar defendiendo el derecho de la ciudadanía norteamericana y mundial a la información, al acceso a la información. Y por el contrario, muchos de ellos están atacando a Julián, están atacando a ti.
I think when we look at this dynamic, we need to think about the fact that the situation of the media is very fragile today. In the United States, we have a corporate media. They're not really publicly funded, they're not publicly
Es un grave problema. ¿A quién pertenecen los medios de comunicación? Son negocios que deben garantizarte un derecho, el derecho a la información, pero por definición, si entra en conflicto el negocio, y no solo rentabilidad económica, rentabilidad política, frente a tu derecho de acceder a la información, por definición va a prevalecer lo primero, ¿no? Porque son negocios que buscan fin de lucro, económico, político, etc.
Yeah, when we look at this corporate media, at least in the United States, everyone understands the problems and the power dynamics here. The difficulty is, how do you resolve the tension of a system where the incentives and the rules that are in place incentivize the wrong kind of behavior? And what we see is we do have independent media in the United States. We've got small groups, we've got internet groups and individual independent journalists. And we also have good work that's happening in some of these corporate media places. But by and large, while the government in the United States currently has not tried to put journalists in prison on a massive scale, they have in a few exceptional circumstances, they have thought, well, how can we get the media to support our narrative? How can we get them to support our perspective if we can't simply threaten them with prison the way they do in a lot of countries? And the answer that has happened so far is access. You don't get to talk to the minister if you're critical. You don't get to talk to the head of the CIA if you're constantly criticizing the CIA. And those things, as you said, are worth money to a corporate media. So people who write stories that lose advertising, that lose sponsorship, that lose access, they have difficulty surviving in these kind of systems. But there's a larger question here, which there are these two prongs of this media environment that we're talking about. One is the reporting and publishing process itself. This is the media that we're talking about today. Then the second part is, well, if that media can't get access to information, true and unbiased information, documentary evidence from the government itself, because they're using secrecy privileges, or because they're refusing to meet with critical reporters, there's that other means of access to information. And of course, the public gets all of their information broadly from the media. Whether it's a good media, whether it's a bad media, that's all we have in modern society. And that is from direct sourcing. That is from whistleblowers, right? That is from unauthorized disclosures, as the government likes to describe them. And we need to understand that in a world today where these institutions, and again, it's not just government, it's companies too, are so powerful and they're so private and they're so effective in maintaining their veil of secrecy. How do we pierce that to understand what the activities of these people who have so much influence in our life actually look like? And this is something that we've seen from WikiLeaks. This is something that we've seen from my case. This is something that we've seen from brave people in China providing information to the New York Times, from people in Iran who are providing information to international media, from the John Doe, the unknown person who revealed the Panama Papers about offshore wealth and people trying to avoid taxes. All of these things were crucial, and all of these stories, providing this material to journalists, was illegal. And I think this is what people miss. Again, it's the distinction between the morality and the legality of a thing. Sometimes the only moral decision that an individual has is to break the law. And how do we resolve that paradox? We're in a democracy, a developed democracy like the United States today, when it is not an individual who's up to no good, when it's not somebody embezzling from the government, it's not somebody stealing office supplies, but it is the system that is beginning to fail. It is the rules that have broken down. How do you reform that? And I think in the United States, we have a long history of where whistleblowers have invigorated this process. They have forced the government to contend with, acknowledge, and eventually investigate real crimes and problems. And I think even in Latin America, we see this quite clearly right now. It is very possible, in my opinion, that Lula would be in prison today if not for this whistleblower. And what we have to ask for all of these people...
Glenn Greenwald again, eh?
Yeah.
Wonderful guy.
All of these people who rightly, I mean, we all want to respect the law, but we understand the value of the law. And a lot of these people criticize publishers and whistleblowers and journalists for going, well, this technically was a violation of law. Yes, the government was breaking the law, but revealing that they broke the law was itself a crime. And the question is not, was this disclosure legal or illegal? The question is the information that they provided true or false? Is the information they provided useful to society or harmful to society? The question is, would you rather not know what's really going on?
Bueno, podrían ser atenuantes, pero si se rompió la ley en un Estado de Derecho, hay que sancionar a aquella infracción con atenuantes, que se dijo la verdad y por el bien de la sociedad, y con eso se puede eliminar la pena. Y de hecho, si tú regresas a Estados Unidos, corres el riesgo de ser juzgado bajo el Espionage Act, acta de espionaje, que incluye pena de muerte, y la pena de muerte es rechazada por todos los instrumentos internacionales de derechos humanos, empezando por la Convención de San José, el Pacto de San José, por el Sistema Interamericano de Derechos Humanos, pero Estados Unidos no ha ratificado esa convención y mantiene pena de muerte, que es un atentado a los derechos humanos, de acuerdo a todos los instrumentos. Y se da la paradoja de que estás asilado en Rusia, el país de Stalin, que supuestamente perseguía a sus ciudadanos, un país donde la propaganda dice que no hay libertad. Y en tu país, teóricamente, ¿no?, te pueden juzgar con una ley que incluye pena de muerte. ¿Cómo explicar esta paradoja, Edward?
I mean, the death penalty is tremendously controversial amongst the people of the United States. It has a lot of political support because it's common in every country, I think, for people to go, oh, you know, if you reduce the penalties for crime, you're soft on crime. And suddenly you'll have an opponent who goes, oh, no, you know, we'll torture criminals, we'll throw them out of helicopters, we'll do whatever. It's a common political tactic. And so it's very difficult to reform these things in the United States, but we do see, I would like to think, fewer executions over time. The fact that we have any at all, as you say, by international standards is problematic. It's strange for someone like me to academically be talking about this, but I would look at it a little bit differently. If you put someone in prison for life, and under the laws that I've been charged under, as you said, the Espionage Act of 1917, which was a law that was initially created not to protect national security, but to silence dissent against the U.S.'s involvement in the wars of that day. They didn't want to face sort of domestic resistance, so they made it a crime. The likely penalty is 10 years per count. And the government argues that each document, you know, each fact that I revealed is a different count. Now, of course, journalists have published so many stories on this. I would be facing thousands of years in prison. What's the difference between thousands of years in prison and a death penalty? Right? Whether they kill you with a cage or whether they kill you with a bullet, they're still killing you. But it's not about me. You know, everybody looks at this. I have, despite the craziness of the laws that I've been charged under, and it's actually worse than you say, Because in most crimes in the United States, you have the ability to tell the jury why you did what you did, even if you're charged with murder, right? There are two facts that the prosecution has to prove, or two facts rather that the jury has to consider. One was what you did a crime, and two, was it justified? In the case of murder, for example, it could be self-defense. You could be protecting someone. You could have no choice. But in the case of publishing true information, in the case of me talking to a journalist, the US government, under the Espionage Act, forbids this second prong. You only ask one question: did this person commit a crime? Justification, motivation, it is forbidden from being mentioned to the jury. And so this is why I say there is no fair trial that's provided under the Espionage Act. And despite the craziness of this law, I have argued to the United States government, I have said I will return and volunteer myself for trial on a single condition, which is that I get to tell the jury why I did what I did. And the government has refused. Instead, they sent me back a letter signed by the Attorney General that says, well, we promise not to torture you.
Eso es realmente increíble. Y tú hablaste sobre el presidente Obama, Premio Nobel de la Paz, demócrata, pero ni todos los gobiernos juntos han tenido más gente acusada bajo el Espionage Act que el presidente Obama. 8 personas, tú, Julián, etc. ¿No es aquella otra contradicción muy grave?
Well, so it's an interesting thing, actually. You mentioned Julian there. It is true that Barack Obama charged more people under the Espionage Act than all other presidents combined in the United States. The executive editor of that New York Times we talked about earlier said the Obama White House was the most secretive White House she'd ever seen. Now, she hadn't seen the Trump White House.
Julián Sanz, no estoy seguro. ¿Está acusado bajo el Espionage Act o no, Julián?
Yes,
Sí.
he's facing, I think, 17 counts under the Espionage Act, and one there's some computer charge.
Manning, etc., ¿no?
Right. The thing is, actually, Obama didn't charge Assange under the Espionage Act. They thought about it. They investigated it. They wrote up the theory of the case. But they said, we aren't going to charge Assange internally. They never said this publicly until very late in the administration. But even though they thought about it, even though they believed that they could, they said they wouldn't do it. Because if they charged Assange, how do they distinguish that from every other journalist at the New York Times who publishes stories based on classified information? What is this going to look like from tomorrow? And they said no. And for all the criticisms that you can have of that White House, of the United States government as it is today, and of course I have some disagreements with the Obama administration policies myself, because that's when I came forward. By all measures, Obama was one of the less aggressive presidents here. And the fact that he didn't bring this charge is a credit to him. But here's the thing. In the United States, you're never more than 8 years away from a change of president. And now we have a President Donald Trump. And now Donald Trump's Justice Department did bring these charges. And now we face this trigger. Now Assange faces these challenges. And it's not, this is what everyone, I think, misses. They get caught up in the whistleblowers because we're human. We have faces. You hear our stories. You think about our families. And, you know, I'm very grateful for the support that I've encountered throughout all of these years. But what happens to me as an individual doesn't matter. You know, if I get pushed off a building, if I get run over by a bus tomorrow, I did the things that I believed in. I did the best that I could, and I'm happy with the decisions that I made. I'm satisfied with that. But what happens to the next whistleblower if I go back to prison in the United States for the rest of my life? What happens to the next publisher who has evidence of war crimes come across their desk, like a Julian Assange did, if Julian Assange spends the rest of his life in prison? What does tomorrow look like if we do nothing about these attacks on press freedom?
Sí, has escuchado hablar de la obra de George Orwell de 1984, de Big Brother. ¿Crees que vivimos en un mundo así, vigilados por el gran hermano?
So it's interesting when you mention 1984. There's, of course, the big joke today where people say that it looks like governments around the world see 1984 as an instruction manual. You know, it was meant to be a dystopia. It was meant to be something we can't imagine. The worst thing in 1984 was a TV that listened to you. Now we buy that. You know, everybody has a smart TV. People have phones in their pockets that are tracking everywhere they go. You don't know it, you don't see it, you can't control it. You don't have an option to say, no, I would rather not be tracked, thank you. If you could, if there was a button that says don't track me, everybody would click it. But we're denied that choice. And that's what's interesting about the system that we have today. Yes, there is an abuse of force. Yes, there is an abuse of law in many ways. But there's another part of a different book, the Aldous Huxley Brave New World thing, where we are, in a way, being taught to amuse ourselves to death. We work so hard for companies that take everything that they can from us. At the end of the day, we're exhausted. We just want to take care of our family. We just want to watch our shows. We just want to see, what tomorrow's going to bring. We have no bandwidth for higher ordered thinking. We have no ability or resources available to engage in political passions. In the United States now, young people graduate college with debts that they won't be able to pay off until the end of their lives. Housing is completely unaffordable. The United States is really exceptional in the world in the fact that there's no national health service. The insurance companies are so exploitative.
Por si acaso, Estados Unidos es los países desarrollados más desiguales del mundo. Entre los desarrollados, es de los más desiguales.
Yeah, and this is the thing, right? People look at this and they want to think of it as like, it's a platform for, as you say, anti-imperialism or anti-Americanism. But you don't have to be anti-American, and you shouldn't be anti-American. I think that's a mistaken thing. People.
Yo no lo soy, por si acaso. Y me molesta mucho esa izquierda que es anti-imperialista, anti-América. Debemos ser a favor de la justicia, de la verdad, del derecho a la libertad, a la prosperidad de todos los pueblos del planeta.
Right. You know, this is the thing. You don't have to be against a country to recognize the flaws in its system. And as important as it is to look at what's happening in foreign countries, what's happening in powerful countries, what's happening in all these institutes of power, what I think my story taught me is that if we look around ourselves in the local, in our workplace, in our homes, in our communities, in our countries, we realize that we can make changes. You know, maybe you're not going to save the world, but you don't need to by yourself. All you have to do is lay down one brick. All you have to do is put one thing there, and someone else can put their contribution next to it. They can lay their brick, and bit by bit, we create a foundation. It's a structure that everyone can build upon, and then we build something better than the system that we have today. When we see the failures in the system, it is incumbent on us to do something about it, even in small, small ways. You know, people make this big question for me because, of course, I have so many critics, I have so many supporters. They go, hero or traitor, which one are you? And I say, I'm neither. I'm a citizen. There are no heroes. I'm just an ordinary person who did something unusual.
Yo creo que eres un héroe, Edward.
But no, this is important.
Hiciste algo muy valiente.
Thank you, and I'm honored that you say that, but I say this seriously. This is a...
Y te lo estoy diciendo seriamente también. Ahora un poco más graciosamente, lo que tu reflexión sobre tu país, que si criticas a tu país estás contra tu país, me recuerda un poco la cultura latinoamericana. Es más o menos lo mismo. Si tu madre cocina horrible y tú dices cocina mal, eres mal hijo. Tienes que decir que eres la mejor cocinera del mundo. No, el cariño es otra cosa y empieza por ser sincero y saber criticar.
We have a saying in my country. There was an old...
Creí que aquello era patrimonio de la cultura latinoamericana. Hasta me siento un poco más tranquilo con lo que escucho.
This saying in my country is, it was an old one which meant you shouldn't question your country. You know, you're all on the same team. And the way it was said was, my country, right or wrong. But we had a great writer in my country who, after some years, took that quote and said, my country, right or wrong. If right, to be kept right. And if wrong, to be set right. And I think this is better. When we say things like, I'm not a hero, I'm saying that in the context of there are no heroes, there are only heroic choices. The reason I say this is part of a conversation that I had with Daniel Ellsberg, who inspired me. He was the whistleblower behind the Pentagon Papers of the 1970s that showed the United States government, in a top secret study, had prolonged the war and cost thousands of American lives and lives of people in Vietnam and the surrounding region, simply for political purposes. But he believes, and I love him, he's a very dear friend to me, he believes that we should call people heroes, that we should raise them up because it inspires people. I actually say the opposite. I say when you call someone a hero, what you're doing is you're separating themselves from you. You're saying they're better than you. You're saying they did something different than you. You're saying you couldn't do what they did. And this was what kept me silent for so long in the intelligence community, when I saw things that I knew were wrong. When I talked to my coworkers and they knew things were wrong too, but they said, what are you going to do about it? You know what happens to people who speak up. You know what happens to people who rock the boat. But the thing is, we are never more than one decision away from making a difference. The hero that you're waiting for is you, because it's not about who you are, it's about what you do.
Maravilloso. Terminemos este programa ajustando un poquito cuentas con la historia, querido Edward. Tú un momento dado pediste asilo al Ecuador, yo era el presidente del Ecuador. Te dio un salvoconducto nuestro cónsul en Londres para que puedas salir de Hong Kong, Fidel Narváez. Yo no lo conozco a Fidel, lo hizo sin mi autorización. Cuando llamé muy enojado, no por el hecho en sí mismo, sino que no nos hubiera advertido, el canciller estaba de gira en Asia, tampoco pudo consultarle, tomó la decisión él solo. Me contestó con mucha dignidad, presidente, con todo respeto, lo volvería a hacer. La libertad de una persona, un inocente, estaba en riesgo, e incluso me dio el ejemplo de un famoso cónsul que tuvimos durante la Segunda Guerra, Muñoz Borrero, que arriesgó su vida por ayudar a los judíos, él estaba en Europa, a salir de la Alemania nazi. Entonces, todo mi respeto para Fidel. Ni siquiera lo sancionamos, ¿no? Porque me dio una muestra de dignidad y de valentía y de coherencia muy clara. En todo caso, en tu libro dices que yo recibí presiones de Estados Unidos. En verdad me llamó el vicepresidente Biden para hablarme de tu caso, pero de forma muy cortés. Jamás hubiéramos aceptado presiones de ninguna naturaleza. De hecho, con mucha grosería, mucha prepotencia, congresistas, senadores hablaban de quitarnos las preferencias arancelarias y en respuesta renunciamos unilateralmente a esas preferencias arancelarias sin dejarnos presionar de nadie. Sin embargo, teníamos ya el caso de Julian Assange. Era difícil para un país pequeño atender este nuevo caso, además que para tratar la petición de asilo debías estar en territorio ecuatoriano. Bueno, y finalmente llegaste a Rusia, ¿no? Quería aclarar ese punto porque, te insisto, nosotros no recibimos presión en los Estados Unidos y jamás lo hubiéramos aceptado. Y de hecho, frente a las groseras expresiones de ciertos senadores, líderes, dirigentes políticos, renunciamos unilateralmente a las preferencias arancelarias. Creo que el tiempo nos dio la razón. Mira lo que lamentablemente pasó con Julian Assange y en nombre de Ecuador quiero pedirle disculpas al mundo. Pero imagina lo que te hubiera pasado si estabas con el gobierno actual en Ecuador.
I appreciate the explanation. I've never heard it, of course, directly from you. I do want to say, first off, that I do owe a tremendous debt to Fidel Narváez, who was the officer who signed the set of passage.
No lo conozco, pero tremenda muestra de dignidad, valentía y coherencia. Enfrentar al propio presidente y decirle, presidente, lo haría nuevamente. Estaba en riesgo la libertad de un inocente.
Yeah,
¿Te imaginas?
He did something that I feel, having talked about heroism now for so long, was truly heroic, and I will always admire that decision. The thing in the context of the Ecuadorian conversations with the United States that I did appreciate in the context of it, of course, I only know what was publicly reported in the news in the period. But of course, after the discussions broke down, and the United States government was publicly threatening trade preferences in Ecuador for, I believe they were farmers. Um, the Ecuadorian government offered in response to get rid of their trade preferences and provide human rights funding.
No lo hizo oficialmente, eran algunos dirigentes políticos, jamás oficialmente el gobierno de Estados Unidos. Pero por esas groseras expresiones, ahí sí, signo de imperialismo, nosotros renunciamos unilateralmente a esas preferencias.
But in this context of the larger question that you say, of course, with what's happened in Ecuador, I do think it's unusual how fortunate I've been in my fate, because I, again, always intended to go to Latin America, Ecuador, Bolivia, maybe Venezuela. And what we've seen in Latin America in the years since is a tremendous sense of disruption. Now, I don't follow Latin American politics with detail, so I can't express an opinion deeply on these things. But I do think it's sad that when we look at the state of the world today and the need for asylum, for the protection of basic human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was, in many cases, promulgated. It was produced by the United States. And it guarantees the right to seek and enjoy asylum. And yet now we see today the United States going against that, calling that into question, trying to undermine these rights. Latin America, of course, has some of the strongest asylum rights in law anywhere in the world. But we need a kind of reliability of protection for the people who are in the most vulnerable circumstances in the world. And what has happened in the case of Julian Assange, I think, is a tremendously threatening thing to anyone who works in journalism.
Permíteme finalizar con dos peticiones personales, o preguntas también. Primero, ¿lo volvieras a hacer? Pese al costo que has tenido que enfrentar. Y lo segundo, un mensaje a los jóvenes del mundo.
I would definitely do it again. I have to say it's unexpected because I have paid a real price. I can't return home. I'm in a country that's not my own, not of my choosing. But I am actually more satisfied and more connected in the work that I do today than the work that I did before. Working in the intelligence services, working in the sort of classified world, as you say, these people can do good and necessary work when things are proper, when things are appropriate, when the policies and the laws are correct. But when they break down and you become part of a machine that is causing real harm, not just to faraway people, foreigners, names that you read in a report, but to people in your own country, to the rights that you signed up to defend, there's that question that all of my coworkers ask, what are you going to do about it? And so many of us respond with a shrug, we go, oh, what are you going to do about it? That's the way things are. But they're only that way because we allowed them to be that way, The thing that I'm most proud of, and the thing that gives me the confidence to say that I would do it again, is that when somebody asks me, what are you going to do about it, I have my answer. And this is the thing that I think all young people need to hear when we're living in a truly historic time where everything is changing. When someone asks you, what are you going to do about it, the answer is, everything that I can.
Edward, muchas gracias por esta maravillosa conversación. Si antes te admiraba, ahora te admiro mucho más. Y ustedes, queridas amigas y amigos, hasta un nuevo programa de Conversando con Correa.